It is a pleasure to be with you tonight. So hello and thank you for joining us today. My name is the Reverend Angel Luis Rivera-Agosto, and I serve as the Community Engagement Senior Coordinator for Justice Initiatives for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the U.S. and Canada. I'm an ordained minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Puerto Rico. We stand in the U.S. and Canada. So a general ministry of the Disciples Church, the non-for-profit National Benevolent Association, better known as NBA, collaborates with leaders and health and social service organizations to strengthen and transform communities through compassion, healing, and justice. The NBA provides education, companionships, inspiration, and resources for organizational and leadership development for health and social service ministries. All of our work with partners is grounded in our historic mission of justice and advocacy. As we get started, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website at nbacares.org. You may also follow along via automated transcription using the AI-generated captions. Look for the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. It is my privilege to welcome you to this webinar titled From Montgomery to Minneapolis, Organizing in Times of Disruption, with the first slide of our presentation tonight, as a contribution from NBA to the Disciples Justice Ministries Group's commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, an event in history that sparked the civil rights movement in the United States and has inspired social justice struggles for years ahead. So as we get started, I would like to inform you, and I just tell you that this webinar is being recorded. So please be mindful that this will be available for future viewing for people who hadn't the opportunity to be with us tonight. So let us get into our business tonight. Disruption is painful. It interrupts routines, unsettles communities, and exposes fear, grief, and conflict. It shakes what feels stable, even when what is stable is unjust. But disruption is also something else. In the spirit of this webinar's title, disruption is a strategic form of resistance that interrupts ongoing harm and threats to democracy, creating the conditions for broader participation, relationship building, and long-term transformation. One way to hold this tension is through a deeply theological image, the cross. For Jesus Christ, opting for the cross was not an act of seeking comfort. Jesus opted for a place where violence was revealed, power was challenged, and suffering was made visible. Yes, it was and still is the place where death does not have the final word, where new life becomes possible. In this way, disruption acts like the cross in social life. It is painful because it exposes the cost of truth, but it is also healing because that truth paves the way for transformation. Today's conversation isn't about disruption just for the sake of it. It's about how communities organize in the face of disruption so that pain doesn't become permanent and crisis doesn't turn into despair. To frame our time together, I want to briefly name 3 elements of organizing in times of disruption. And our intention here is to move beyond mere preconceived steps or formulas. These elements are based on practices we see across movements, from Montgomery in the 1950s to Minneapolis today. So first, I want to refer to blocking as interrupting harm and naming the cross. The first element is interrupting harm. Disruption begins when communities collectively say, This is not normal. This is not acceptable. And this will not continue without resistance. This is often where the cross becomes visible. In Montgomery, the bus boycott disrupted a system that depended on racial humiliation to function. Refusing to ride the buses was costly and risky, but it exposed an injustice that had long been hidden in plain sight. In Minneapolis, organizing against ICE raids disrupts systems that rely on fear, silence, and invisibility. Accompaniment, monitoring, and public witness bring harm into the open. Here, disruption is painful because it confronts power, but necessary because it names what is killing communities. But then from blocking, we go into bridging or building bridges to collective power, carrying the cross together. Disruption does not heal simply by stopping something. It heals when people are not left to carry the weight alone. In Montgomery, the boycott endured because thousands of ordinary people organized carpools, shared resources, and sustained one another over time. The burden of disruption became collective. In Minneapolis, resistance to ICE raids brings together immigrants, faith leaders, neighbors, legal advocates, and young organizers. Relationships are forged across differences. Here, the cross calls us from individual suffering to a shared struggle that becomes power. And the third element we want to discuss tonight from the narratives and the experiences of our guest speakers is to build and to reimagine the future, life beyond the cross. The cross is never the end of the story. In Montgomery, the boycott took the form of people refusing to board buses, but its deep meaning was way beyond that. It was about dignity, citizenship, and a vision of democracy that included everyone. In Minneapolis, organizing against ICE raids is not only about stopping enforcement actions, it is about imagining communities where safety is not defined by surveillance and belonging is not conditional. This is where disruption moves beyond suffering toward transformation. So as we hold the cross, disruption is painful. It exposes wounds and unsettles what feels secure. And disruption is also healing. It interrupts harm, builds collective power, and opens space for new futures. The question before us is not whether we are living in a time of disruption. We already are in it. The question is how we organize from a cross perspective and start carving our way through resurrection as people called by God to affirm justice and the fullness of life. How do we redirect disruption from despair to deeper democracy? How do we cast fragmentation to forge stronger relationships? How can we confront exhaustion to redirect our efforts towards transformation? That is the conversation our speakers are guiding us into today. And it is now my honor to introduce them. The Reverend Laurie Pound Feille is an ordained minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the US and Canada. A recently retired pastor as of May 2025 after serving for over 12 years at First Christian in Minneapolis and at other churches in Texas. Reverend Dr. Pound Feille is the founder and co-facilitator of Disciples Public Presence and the Disciples Justice Ministries Group. Thank you, Laurie, for being here tonight. We also have the Reverend Dr. Sullivan Jr., who is also an ordained minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the US and Canada. He served as the executive director of the 104-year-old statewide organization, the Ohio Council of Churches, until his retirement in December 2025. He served as a senior pastor in Findlay, Ohio, at Victims Families for Reconciliation, and as the regional minister and president of the Northwest and Pennsylvania regions, respectively. internationally known speaker and leader in the social justice, ecumenical, and anti-death penalty realms. He is the co-president of the Disciples Justice Action Network. Welcome, Jack, and thank you for being here with us. For this first round of discussion, both speakers will have 15 minutes each for a total of 30 minutes. Let's start with Reverend Dr. Sullivan Jr. Jack, please, can you share with us how the legacy of the Montgomery Bus Boycott has inspired you in your work and how it can illuminate our present struggles through the Block, Bridge, Build framework, which was suggested to guide us into them? Thank you again, Jack, and the floor is yours. Blessings.
Thank you, Angel Luis, and good evening to everyone. I'm privileged to join you in this historic conversation tonight and to join my partner and friend Laurie in presenting to you in this space. The Montgomery Bus Boycott was a 13-month, 381-day citywide mass protest aimed at ending segregation in public transportation, fair treatment for African-American passengers by bus drivers, and the employment of African-Americans as bus drivers, particularly along Montgomery City Line's routes frequented by African-Americans. December 5th, 1955 was the starting day of the boycott. This commencement day came just after the arrest of Rosa Parks for her steadfast refusal to surrender her seat to a white man on a city bus. It ended on December 30th, 1956, after the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on city bus lines was unconstitutional. Friends, the boycott was an ultimate David and Goliath moment in the life of our nation, as the African-American community of Montgomery, while practicing nonviolence and numbering 30 to 40,000, joined by allied people of color and white supporters, courageously and strategically unified, became organized, and was then mobilized to disrupt the system, the racist system, and deploy their 5 smooth stones of freedom, dignity, hope, determination, and justice to topple this Goliath of white supremacy in the bus lines. According to Shirley Cherry, tour director of the Dexter Parsonage Museum in Montgomery, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said there are 2 things African Americans must do to be free, and indeed all of us. Number 1, forgive everybody for everything they've ever done to you. And number 2, lose your fear of dying. Such a way of living gives us power, what I call God's resurrection power, at work in us and among us and through us. Through nonviolent activism, these tenacious African Americans had no fear of dying as they stood up to the Goliaths of bombings, domestic terrorism, assassinations, water cannons, and dogs, or as we call this lethal cocktail, we call it now weapons of white Christian nationalism, wielded by people who had the audacity to self-identify, if you will, as Christian. At the time of the boycott, Montgomery's African-American bus ridership was the financial backbone of the bus company, as they totaled 75% of bus ridership, with over 50% of Black domestic workers depending on the bus to travel to and from work. This according to research carried out by Greater Cleveland congregations. The following are some of the pivotal organizations that gave leadership and support to the boycott. The Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, This was the primary coordinating body formed specially to lead the boycott on December 5, 1955. It was headed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and included local ministers and community leaders. The Women's Political Council, WPC, led by Joanne Robinson, this group of Black professional women laid the groundwork for the boycott. They were responsible for printing and distributing the initial 50,000 leaflets that sparked the movement. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, the local Montgomery chapter provided critical legal support and organizational leadership. Key figures like E.D. Nixon and Rosa Parks were prominent members, according to Stanford University research. Of course, Black churches, dozens of Black churches in Montgomery, such as the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, served as meeting hubs, fundraising centers, and communication networks. The Club from Nowhere, quote unquote, a group of women organized by Georgia Gilmore, who cooked and sold food to anonymously fund the boycott's carpool system. Black taxi companies, 18 local taxi companies participated by offering reduced 10-cent fares, matching the bus fare, to boycotters until the city forced them to stop. Labor unions, local chapters, including the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, led by E.D. Nixon, provided organizational expertise from the National Park Service as research. And Divine Nine, Black collegiate Greek letter organizations, played a critical behind-the-scenes role in the Montgomery Bus Boycott by leveraging their networks, leadership, and resources to mobilize the community. Prominent members included activists and church leaders, facilitated logistics, such as setting up carpools, distributing flyers, and organizing, which were crucial to the boycott's long-term success. Among the members were Rosa Parks, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I might add, I'm in that fraternity. Here was the strategy. The strategy of the bus boycott was to hit racists and the structures they manage where it hurts, their pocketbooks. If you cannot persuade on the basis of morality, then persuade on the basis of money, the other M word. Through walking together, praying together, singing together, while arranging carpools, benefiting from supportive employers and volunteer drivers, African Americans moved forward in this great boycott. Together, the boycotters flexed their social, spiritual, and economic muscles as they refused to patronize the racist bus company and otherwise spend their money where they were not treated with equality and dignity. They were disruptors. Here are some key areas of impact of the boycott. Legal victory. The Supreme Court would eventually affirm Browder versus Gale, declaring segregation on public buses to be unconstitutional in November of 1956, ending the boycott on December 20th, 1956. Economic impact. With over 90% participation from Black residents, the boycott hamstrung the bus company financially, proving that the economic power existed in the Black community to work and make for change. National awareness. Intense media coverage of the boycott and Dr. King's arrest and trial over boycotting charges brought international attention to the brutality of Southern segregation. Model for movement. The victory set a roadmap for future civil rights campaigns, demonstrating that organized nonviolent resistance could force change. Leadership development. The formation of the Montgomery Improvement Association and the rise of Dr. King provided a structure and philosophy for the movement from the National Archives. For students of this monumental moment in time, the Montgomery Bus Boycott serves as an essential and foundational case study in social change, demonstrating that organized, nonviolent resistance can successfully dismantle systemic injustice. It taught activists that while a single act of defiance can be a spark, lasting victory requires deep community coordination, economic leverage, and sustained persistence from Greater Cleveland congregations. Following are key lessons from the boycott. Number one, the power of unity and collective action. The boycott's success relied on the participation of nearly the entire Black community in Montgomery, 30 to 40,000 people, who sustained the protest for 381 days. This demonstrated that when oppressed people act as a united front, they can exert significant power. Two, effectiveness of economic pressure. By refusing to ride the buses, the Black community inflicted substantial financial losses on the city's transit system, which relied on them for about 75% of its ridership. This proved that hitting an unjust system's bottom line is a potent tool for forcing desegregation. Three, strategic grassroots organizing. The movement was not a spontaneous outburst, but the result of long-term planning by groups like the Women's Political Council and the Montgomery Improvement Association. They organized a complex network of over 300 carpools and 20,000 daily free car rides to ensure the community could function without the buses. Four, leadership and moral authority. The boycott catapulted a young Martin Luther King Jr. into the national spotlight, showcasing a leadership style rooted in nonviolence and moral clarity of the Black church. It also highlighted the essential, often overlooked role of Black women, like Joanne Robinson and Rosa Parks, who provided the strategic backbone and initial momentum for this movement. Five, dual track strategy, protest plus legal action. The boycott taught that physical protest works best when paired with legal challenges. While residents walked, their lawyers pursued the federal case in Browder versus Gale, which led to the Supreme Court ruling that bus segregation was unconstitutional. Six, resilience and retaliation. Participants faced bombings, mass arrests, and job losses. Their ability to remain disciplined and nonviolent in the face of such provocation won international attention and shifted the moral arc in their favor, from history.com. Now, as we reflect on all of those learnings and implications from the Montgomery Bus Boycott, I want to share 10 understandings for Christian justice organizers that are based on my own experiences as an organizer and as one who has been organized to work and protest for justice in our country. And the first one I would recommend is be attentive to your faith. Be connected to a congregation of some kind, a body with whom you can sing and pray and be nurtured and have fellowship, experience joy, even eat a potluck dinner every now and then, and otherwise feel the presence of God without turning your faith system into a private silo. Being a connected part of a worshiping, active community helps you to build and maintain deep Christian spirituality as your anchor when you're fighting and working for justice. And I think our faith has a way of leading adherents to build bridges with all kinds of people, including forging interfaith collaborative partnerships, and also partnerships with people of no faith at all who run civic organizations. Number two, be proactive with love. My first sermon ever was about love. I suspect my last sermon will be about love also. But be proactive in loving. As Stevie Wonder sang, the force of evil plans to make you its possession. And it will, if we let it, destroy everybody. We all must take precautionary measures. If love and peace we treasure, then you'll hear me when I say, love's in need of love today. Don't delay, send yours in right away. Hate's going around, breaking many hearts. Stop it, please, before it goes too far. It's already gone too far, hate has. Though we may be recipients of threats and hate, we will not be silent. You and I, my friends, must always surrender our Miranda rights, that I heard Frank Thomas say once. Amid a climate of systemic violence, blatant racism, unapologetic fascism, and political intimidation, you and I have to give up our right to remain silent. Love for our neighbors, Hondurans to Haitians, and from Montgomery to Minneapolis, and disdain for injustice will not and must not let us keep silent. We must show love. 3, it's connected. Observe the image of God in the faces of people around you, even those with whom you may disagree. Pray for them all. I learned the importance of prayer in the movement from reading and teaching from a book called Unbinding the Gospel by Reverend Martha Grace Reese. She indicated that when you pray for people around you, whether you know them or not, or agree with them or not, your capacity for caring is expanded, and you connect with a realm that is a lot larger than your own, and you connect with God. 4, affirm diversity and intersectionality. I believe, like I think we all do, that God is the designer of diversity, and God expects equity, and God calls for social inclusion. It's time that you and I insist that, in this climate particularly, that human diversity, as DEI programs continue to be eroded and bulldozed across our land, human diversity is a sign of our communal strength and not a social and political liability. We must give respect to people who are different from us, who in a variety of categories, and expect the same from them in return. And when it comes to the movement that we are part of, if we want people to show up for our causes, we must be careful to show up for theirs. Say what I mean. Several years ago, I was asked to speak at a rally for a largely white group that had experienced discrimination for years. I agreed to do so, but I had to chide the group and say to them, now, I have not seen you show up at our rallies as African Americans when the police shoot down Black and brown bodies who are unarmed in traffic stops. So we need you to show up and stand up and march with us when we are protesting police violence against us in our communities. We need you to be with us, and we will be with you. Intersectionality. 5, learn from and line up with people who have lost the most, been hurt the most, and who are targeted the most. Theirs are the stories that require the spotlight. It's the heart of organizing, getting people to the stage where they can tell their stories and give their remedies, their solutions, and talk about what is needed from their vantage points. Theirs are the stories that must be heard by people in positions and people with power. Help them tell their stories and help them to get out and vote, particularly this coming November in the midterm elections. 6, form and join coalitions, ecumenical, interfaith, and civic, where you receive the gifts of leadership from others while sharing your own. With the Ohio Council of Churches, everything that the council did when it came down to organizing for mental health justice, or gun violence prevention, or stopping executions, or stopping firearms from being sold in our communities, all that we did as a council was done with interfaith partnerships. I was known for standing next to my Sikh brother and my Baha'i sister at every rally, and also our brothers and sisters from the labor union movement and from other realms of civic life. We all worked together, and we were a force, a vocal and visible force for change in Columbus, Ohio, together. Such coalitions are needed and valuable. Remember how, from Montgomery, how African American organizations planned and worked together to give leadership to end discrimination in the bus lines there. Every group that has a heart for justice can play a role in organizing for justice and demanding justice with other groups. They may believe and worship differently than you, but when we work together, we strengthen our collective community. 7, be a good steward of the platform you have been given. Now, these are threatening and ominous times. We all know this. Yet, by the grace of God at work with us and the power of the Holy Spirit and the resurrection power at work within us, we must not allow threats and fear, external or internal, to mute our messages. Following the guidance from 1 Peter 3:15, let us always be ready to make our defense to anyone who demands from us, an accounting for the hope that is in you. Now is the time for us to render our compelling faith stories about why, in God's name, we are working for justice and why we're doing it in ecumenical and interfaith and civic partnerships during these times. 8, embody the justice you seek. As more and more books are being banned in local school systems and libraries, now's the time to turn your church library into a hub for diversity, equity, and inclusion, learning and teaching. Stock books by banned authors, particularly by people of color authors. Hang pictures of biblical characters, including Jesus, with skin colors that are other than white. After all, that's a biblical story, other than white, and not just about white. Collaborate with other churches, faith groups, organizations. Use church buildings, often empty from Monday to Sunday, as places you can bring in activists as subject matter experts to conduct teach-ins that educate church and community members about key issues and legislation. Allow your fellowship hall to serve as an incubator for the formation of justice ministries. Help folks in your congregation understand why justice matters to God. Don't assume they already know. I served a church once where I led a 6-week study on the Bible and social justice. And a man came to me after one of the classes and said, "Reverend, I've been a Bible student for 40 years. This is the first time I ever understood justice to be part of my Christian faith." I just said, well, I'm glad we're here together. Amen. 9, attend to sacred relationships while caring for your body and soul. Even Jesus chilled out every now and then. Why not us? No one should be on all of the time. Care for the people who are important to you during these times of disruption, and receive care from them as well. Eat well and take time to exercise consistently. Use all of your vacation time. Don't let it roll over. These investments will pay dividends in your leadership, perspectives, and abilities. And number 10, as Dr. King said, forgive everybody for everything they've ever done. Life is too short to be affixed to hate and to be tethered to grudges. forgive people, even when they don't deserve it, even when they don't even know it. That way, you can move on with what God has conferred on to you to give leadership to. And then Dr. King also taught, lose your fear of death. I'm glad we're doing this during Lent. During this time of upheaval, with unwarranted suffering, threats, retaliation, and literal death at the hands of ICE and other instruments of the abuse of power, be sure to identify a cause so important to you that it's worth dying for. As then Dr. King suggested, we can then be made fit to live. As Martin Luther even wrote in his great hymn of the church, that word above all earthly powers, no thanks to them abideth. The spirit and the gifts are ours, through him who with us sideth. Let goods and kindred go. This mortal life also, the body they may kill. God's truth abideth still. God's kingdom is forever. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, Jack, for this thoughtful presentation based in your experience and knowledge in these matters. And it is powerful to see how inspired we need to be in this spirituality of resistance and care and justice. So thank you very much for this beautiful, challenging, and inspiring presentation. Let's hear from Reverend Dr. Pound Feille about what Jack has shared, and also your own experience accompanying and participating in the recent Minneapolis resistance to immigrant policies and ICE presence there, and to inspire us to block, bridge, and build for social justice. So the floor is yours, Laurie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Angel Luis, for the invitation to be a part of this webinar. And I was saying that my love for Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan just abounds. Thank you so much, my friend, for what you shared. You inspire me every time I hear you speak. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to talk to you about Minneapolis and the occupation of Minneapolis, what it meant for the people of Minneapolis, but I need to give you context of what the reality was like in Minneapolis at the time of the surge and before, and why the federal government said that they came into Minneapolis. If you remember, they said that they came in because of welfare fraud. They had found a lot of fraud happening, and that they were coming in to get the fraud out of Minneapolis, out of Minnesota. In this, they blamed our Somali neighbors, and they blamed them of doing the welfare fraud. They started occupying in December, and then, of course, the big surge happened in January. But here's the reality of what was happening in Minneapolis before the occupation. First is the population of Minnesota. The population of Minnesota is 5,830,405. The white population is 76 to 81.5%, just a hotbed for systemic white supremacy. But that is the population and the breakdown here in Minnesota. The population of our immigrant siblings in Minnesota is 8.4 to 9%. A very small percentage of the population are our immigrant siblings. And again, the federal government is blaming our Somali siblings for all of the fraud in the state of Minnesota. Who did they send in? They sent in the ICE agents to come in and rid us of this horrible scourge of fraud, right? Well, the number of ICE agents that are typically in Minnesota, there's 190 that cover North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota. 80 of which were based in the Twin Cities. The number of agents that we had during Metro Surge was 3,000. 3,000 agents, where we normally had 80. Another thing to note is with those 80, they wore blue jackets with name badges and no mask. They identified themselves. Well, when they came, that's not how they were dressed. They covered their face with masks. They carried AR-15s. They wore bulletproof vests. They wore camo. They didn't identify themselves. They didn't have name badges. So there was a big change from what ICE used to be to what ICE became. And there's a difference between our police force in Minneapolis and the ICE agents. During the height of the surge, as I said, there were 3,000 ICE agents. Minneapolis police officers, we have 600. 600 police officers that were trying to do their jobs, and 3,000 ICE agents who were trying to take residents off of the streets of Minneapolis. Yes, they were in other parts of Minnesota. They were in St. Paul, they were in Rochester, they were in outlying cities here in Minnesota, but the majority were right here in Minneapolis. The population of Minneapolis is 428,000. 3,000 ICE agents. The population of Minneapolis is 428,000. Those of Somali descent in Minnesota is 84,000, and the majority of them live in the Twin Cities area. The Somali descent population, as I said that, the majority are in the Twin Cities. The Somali descent population in the United States is 260,000. 58% of Somalis in Minnesota were born in the USA. And of the foreign-born Somalis in Minnesota, 87% are naturalized citizens. So the context, we're here in Minnesota. There is welfare fraud. That's a truth. There is welfare fraud. And the federal government is blaming a very small section of the population, where the majority are US citizens. When they came in, that's who they said they were coming after, was to get the people that are doing the fraud. And I do need to add that the head of the whole fraud scheme is a white woman, is not a Somali. They didn't come after her. So why did we resist? We protected and we resisted, and we are still protecting and resisting. Even today, ICE was entering homes in my neighborhood in Minneapolis. But as to why we resisted and why we resisted in the way that we did, we have to go all the way back to the murder of Mr. George Floyd in 2020. To have some insight into today's resistance and why it isn't violent, what we learned. We learned that we are in this together and we are stronger together after 2020. At that point, there was real tension between the residents and the police force. That doesn't mean that that tension is gone. It just means that it was even greater in 2020. And especially with the lies that came out about how Mr. Floyd was actually murdered. When the truth came out, the community blew up and protested, and there was some violence, and there were some buildings that burned. And all the while, that tension got stronger and stronger and stronger between the police force and between the residents of Minneapolis. When all of that happened, everybody was trying to do everything. Everybody was trying to show up everywhere they could, stand with everybody they could, make sure that the voices that needed to be heard were heard. It was nonstop for months. In that, we learned that we needed each other. that there was no way we could do this alone. There was no way that just one group could stand. We had to make sure that African American voices were the voices that were heard, which meant that white clergy who loved to be up front needed to step back and needed to listen and to be quiet. And we learned a lot in what we listened, of what we heard when we were quiet. We also learned that the systems that are here in our city are really benefit people with white skin. The systemic white supremacy is a reality, but it's not just a reality in Minneapolis. It's a reality throughout our country. And it came to light, as we all know, there were protests across the world when Mr. Floyd was murdered. We learned that we needed to change things. Our police force was by the federal government, was told that they needed to change. So there were a lot of changes that have happened since 2020. So in December of 2025 and January of 2026 and continuing, we were a different community when ICE came in. We were a community that had learned to work together, a community that had tried, we're not there by any stretch of the imagination, but a community that tried to work for better lives for everyone here, no matter skin color, no matter where they're from. We have worked very hard at that. We embrace that understanding of community. And part of that comes from what we learned from the civil rights movement. It also comes from the American Indian movement, which was founded in Minneapolis. It also comes from the Black Panthers, who came to Minneapolis at one time and cared for a community when the rest of Minneapolis was not caring for the community. They made sure people had food. They made sure people had clothing. They made sure people had education. We learned from those that came before, and what we also experienced ourselves with the death and murder of Mr. Floyd, that things had to change and be different. We had to love our neighbors. And when the time came, we were prepared to love our neighbors. ICE was taking our neighbors away, literally. Jesus said, love God with every part of your being, with every breath you take, every move you make, and love neighbor as self. This care of neighbor and love of neighbor is not just a Christian understanding. It's an understanding that is shared, though, throughout communities in Minneapolis and also cities throughout the country, of people caring for their neighbors. This caring for neighbors also led to the murders by ICE agents of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, who were both protecting their neighbor. When they were murdered, they were protecting their neighbor. Think about that. Jesus says we're to love neighbor as self, and when we do, it just might get us killed. So how did we resist? We resisted together. We did it together. And I don't know how to stress this enough, that if you're in a community that is not connected with other organizations or other religious institutions or even the corner grocery store, you have to become connected. Everybody did something and is still doing something, but no one did everything or is doing everything. A case in point is the candlelight vigil the night after Alex Preddy was murdered. You may remember we had a big march and rally here in January, and it was great. 50,000 people came. It was organized between the unions and the religious organizations and churches, synagogues, mosques. Everybody organized this together. And it was wonderful to have people come, stand with us, be supportive. And then the next morning, we woke up to Alex Preddy being murdered by an ICE agent. That night, there were candlelight vigils. And typically, like when Mr. Floyd was murdered, we all would go to what is now called George Floyd Square. This time we didn't. Everybody stayed in their own neighborhood and held a candlelight vigil so that if a plane flew over Minneapolis at that time, they would have seen nothing but candlelight coming from the different neighborhoods. And that's where we started protecting. We were already protecting in our neighborhoods, but we began to protect even. We communicated with whistles to let people know if ICE was on our streets or in our neighborhoods, or if we happened to be driving by and saw ICE, we would blow our whistles. We did mutual aid, churches, synagogues, mosques, grocery stores, schools, community centers, you name it, everybody was doing mutual aid. I have a school that's in the backyard of my house, basically. And that school started making sure that families that were afraid to leave home had food, which meant neighbors and parents and friends of the school were going to grocery stores and buying groceries and coming back, and another group would pack the groceries up, and then people would make sure that the kids got the groceries. Some teachers on their own time of their money were driving and delivering the food because their students were doing e-learning because they were too afraid to come to school. Our children were too afraid to come to school. Their parents were too afraid to go to the grocery store. We weren't just buying food. We were buying, if there was a baby at the house, we were buying diapers and baby wipes and feminine products and any type of cooking oil and beans and tomatoes, and trying to get fresh produce and make sure they had milk and eggs and cleaning products, anything that's needed for daily life. But it wasn't just one school doing it, it was every school doing it. And it was all churches combining together and doing this as a community. It's almost like the communion table for us, right? Bringing everything in and everybody receiving from that. That's a beautiful way for us to live. And that's how we have been doing it here. We have school patrols where we patrol when children are dropped off and when children are picked up. We're standing on the corners and we're watching. And we have people that are driving around in cars that are watching. And we have someone at a computer that's checking license plates, because we have people at the federal building who are capturing those license plates for us as ICE is leaving for the day. We have a presence at the Whipple building, at that federal building, where people are standing and protesting and in a nonviolent way and reminding the ICE officers that we're here and that we care for our neighbor and we're not going to let them go anywhere if we have anything to do about it. The Minneapolis police did not help ICE. There are some instances where it looks like they might have, but for the most part, our police chief said we are not helping ICE. Restaurants and businesses have signs on their doors that says we welcome everyone except ICE, or no ICE, you can't come in. That's a typical sign on a business, except for Target and restaurants here. We have resistance singers. We have people who stand and sing in a nonviolent way. These choral communities bring hope and joy and remind us that there is resurrection. And what does that resurrection look like? Everybody doing something and everyone not doing everything. Communicating with our neighbors, building those bridges and relationships between businesses and unions and religious organizations, and as I said, the corner grocery store, because it just might be owned by your immigrant neighbor who is a U.S. citizen. And when ICE comes knocking, they don't care. And they'll just come and take the person who has served you at that grocery store for years and years. That's why Jesus says we are to love God with every part of our being, and we are to love neighbor as self. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurie, for such a heartfelt presentation. What I cherish about what you just shared is that you are sharing what you are sharing because you have lived it and because of the witness, of the kind of witness you have shown there, walking alongside the suffering people. So thank you very much as you continue building community and resisting ICE and all of these policies. Thank you for your prophetic and pastoral presence there and for the work you're doing. Friends, we are open in the chat and the Q&A section in our webinar for questions you may have for our speakers. While you post your questions, let me check how you continue our discussion based on what our presenters have shared before. So any questions you may have for our presenters, please share them in the chat or in our Q&A means here at this call. We want to hear you. We want to address your questions, your doubts, your concerns, and even your comments. So please use the chat box or the Q&A section. In the meantime, both of you, dear friends, have worked and have referred to how to build community in times of despair. And it's beautiful to hear how communities can be together in times like this. But sometimes our difference maybe won't allow us to connect to each other, and specifically ideologies, issues that could affect the way we join forces to address injustice. And we can see communities, for example, Latinos that could be against one another, or even African Americans, white poor people blaming African Americans, African Americans blaming white people, Latinos blaming other different groups, and my suspicion is that that is made by design as to keep people divided. And you see through media how people that could be together aren't. So what could be from your experience? How can we connect in times like this? The weakness for justice, where we find so much division among different groups, that all of them could be suffering from this unjust system, but are more focused on their respective struggles, but not necessarily looking to other struggles, because there are differences or even clashes between struggles, environmental issues, working class issues, racism, and so forth. Please, how can we deal with all of those differences in order to achieve justice in times like this? And any one of you could answer that question, please.
Laurie?
I was hoping you were going to go, Jack.
Okay.
I keep telling people that what's happening here in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, is really unique in that everybody, and when I say everybody's on the same page, that doesn't mean that there's not a neighbor on a street or a business or an elected official. But for the most part, everybody was on the same page that what was happening was wrong. And because we had built those relationships after Mr. Floyd was murdered, it was an easy, it was, when I say it's easy to resist, it's not, but it was easy to, we already had the contacts, we already knew each other, we already had worked together in different ways for everybody just to kind of mobilize. Um, and there are new people in neighborhoods that are now active that weren't active before. But everybody knew this was wrong. This was just wrong. And so I think if you can find that common denominator of why this is wrong, right? If you can talk to the people in the union members and say, this is why we think this is wrong. If you can find that, then it's a beautiful community that's created. I cannot, there's a lot of joy in what has happened in the Twin Cities. There's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of heartache, but it's shared by the entire community. And I think that's the real, from what Jack was sharing, it's about building those connections to where they were able to do the bus boycott because they had already made those connections. Um, if if we had not gone through what we went through when Mr. Floyd was murdered, the resistance probably would have looked a lot different here. I think there would have been more violence. I think when Alex Preddy was murdered, there was a moment when it probably could have tipped a different way. And yet the community came together because we care more about each other, um, and about those who were being taken, that we knew we needed to do this in a different way.
Jack, how about you? What do
Wow.
you think about that question?
What came to mind was the many times I've walked on a city street and I've passed someone passed me, and there's so many times neither one of us spoke. And then I think about the times when one of us had enough boldness to say hello, or how are you? Even though we kept moving, but we took a moment, one of us did, to acknowledge the humanity of the other person by saying hello. I think that's what we need more of. People who are willing to take the risk, if you will, to be bold enough to recognize that humanity in the other person, just to say hello and to get acquainted. And we're not going to start a movement from day one, but we'll have started a conversation from day one that could lead to something big, something powerful. But somebody has to be bold enough to take that first step. And I suggest it be us in the household of faith, and work on connections with people that we may not or do not know well, but we're willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee or tea and a muffin and get acquainted and share ideas. And this is part of what I was mentioning about Gay Reese's book, Unbinding the Gospel. This whole idea of praying for strangers. Her book talks about praying for people in traffic, people who cut you off in traffic. but praying for people and building the capacity for caring for the people that you don't even know. I think we have such a great ability through the Holy Spirit working in us to build capacity among ourselves to care for others. And if we let that happen, I think we have a great chance to form new relationships and partnerships with people for the common good.
Sure, but what about dissent? Because sometimes we try to connect, and issues can divide us. White poor people could say against immigrants, they are taking our jobs, and they're unlawfully in this country. They need to go. We need our jobs back. Or why did they enter to this country and not binding to law? And you can see them and you can hear them, and these are people with pressing social and economic needs, but fighting between each other. What can we do when we find this kind of dissent among people that should be together?
Go ahead, Jack.
I thank you. I think those moments require boldness and truth telling. When I was serving in the Ohio Council of Churches, I visited Springfield, Ohio, maybe 10 times within a 1 to 2 month period. And you might remember Haitians in Springfield had been targeted by the administration, accused of all kinds of insane acts and behaviors. In reality, they were invited to Springfield to work in jobs that needed people to work in them. And so, and they were respectful citizens in Springfield, and they had different ways, of course, but they were contributing to the common good in Springfield. And so there are people outside of Ohio, and some there in Springfield, who spread lies and disinformation about the Haitian population in Springfield. So what happened was clergy and laity in Springfield organized and put their arms around the Haitians and said, you are part of our community. We value you, we love you, and we're going to live in solidarity with you here in Springfield. We're going to dispel the lies, the untruths, and stand up together and work together. And they did that. And it was a beautiful thing to behold, driving half hour from where I lived to Springfield those many times, and being parts of rallies and prayer gatherings and dinners and conversations that supported human dignity and affirmed respect for Haitians and all people in that community. So I think someone has to have that boldness enough to intervene and take the risk of standing out and speaking out and saying, this is insane, it's not true, and this is the truth.
But also maybe we could build bridges of understanding between people with differences among issues by raising more like values that bind us together, regardless of the issues that we could be facing. For example, this thing about conservatives and liberals or progressives or so, sometimes we people that could consider ourselves progressives, maybe we are too brainy in terms of the ways we communicate with other people. And sometimes people could read progressives as arrogance, as people that know everything and look people from the top down. Uh, and sometimes you see this kind of discussions and maybe like circumventing some approaches more from the brain and then to approach the people from the heart and from values that could bind us together, family values, issues that conservative people could manage, but we can manage them too because we also love our families, we also love our children, we also want to protect our households, you know. And I love your approach, Jack and Laurie, because you have made an emphasis in the matters of the heart, in the ways we can connect from human being to human being, uh, from the heart, from the things that we love, from our own stories, from our own narratives. Maybe we are too brainy, and maybe we need to go more into the narratives that bind us together in order to build a better society. Laurie, I don't know if I caught you when I started speaking. Okay, okay. I want to read some of the comments that we had in the chat. Derek Perkins said, "When the community is oppressed and overwhelmed by a shared evil, it becomes a little easier for collaboration, idea sharing, and more." Definitely. Thank you for your comment. And Monica Hunter says, I'm in watch and wait mode, prepping to be bold and making quiet relationships here in the sea of white supremacist, Christian, nationalist, wild, 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 wild west. Thank you, Monica, for your comment. And I am trying to move here into a comment by Karen. Karen is saying the service in Springfield was powerful. I learned how the Haitian immigrants helped save the city.
Mhm.
And Monica continues saying, city from accusations of elitism, I could figure from her previous comment. Chuck Snow say, is it your belief that Minneapolis events, let me, dealing with the chat can be complicated. It is your belief that Minneapolis events will be written in history as having the same impact as Montgomery? That's an excellent question, Chuck. Thank you very much. I repeat the question. Is it your belief? I think that they're referring to you, Laurie, that the Minneapolis events will be written in history as having the same impact as Montgomery. Both of you can answer that if you are able to do so. Please.
I I think it will have a significant impact. Um, because it's a time that a city stood up to the federal government.
Mhm.
And our situation was different because the elected officials in Minneapolis also stood up, as well as the governor. So when I say the whole community, and again, realize there are people that did not and won't, but the community stood up. And so, yeah, the song by Bruce Springsteen, yeah, who will actually be performing at our No Kings rally on Saturday here.
Oh,
Oh my God.
Yeah. Um, but so there was this sort of community wide, not just a section of the community, right, Jack? I mean, that's fair to say?
yeah,
In the Montgomery bus boycott, they were fighting, while we were also fighting a system, they were fighting a system
yeah,
that to fight it meant death,
yeah.
right? I mean, to me, that was, yes, death came into play for us, but it's a different situation. So I think, yes, we'll be in the history books. I think it will have an impact, but I don't know that it's the impact of the bus boycott.
Mm.
What do you think, Jack?
I certainly believe it'll have impact, uh, and I think the impact they'll be complementary, both places, different in many ways, similar in many ways, but both sacred in the fact that people came together and said no to structural systemic injustice. And said we will not live this way, and they rose up, took great risks in both settings to rise up against it, suffered some losses, human losses, and other losses that we may not even ever really fully realize, but still they were losses. And so both are sacred stories, places for me. And I intend to go to Minneapolis. I've not been, but I want to go there. But I can tell you, Alabama, when I'm there, and I go there often, I feel like I'm on sacred, holy ground when I'm there. And my father was born in Selma, and he had to leave under the cover of night from Selma and move to Cleveland because he was accused, falsely so, of killing a white man's mule. And so that was
Mhm.
a death sentence for an African American man in that era. So under the cover of night, he fled to Cleveland and had his life preserved. But there are many stories like that. But the stories of overcoming, of challenging, of disrupting, of being courageous, God was at work there, and I believe God was at work in Minneapolis.
Yeah, but maybe we could have some differences because in Montgomery it was the federal level kind of the one safeguarding the rights of the local people at Montgomery. Now it is the other way around. Is the state protecting the life and well-being of the citizens against the federal government?
Right.
Yeah.
And what are the implications regarding these power relations? You know, and what difference does it make in the kind of struggle that you're having in Minneapolis? Because the federal government is compromised because of authorities violating the rights of the people. So how can it this make different the struggle, and what could be the alternatives when we see a situation kind of in a reverse mode as Montgomery?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer that on Luis. I think resistance is resistance,
Mhm.
and nonviolent resistance does work. I mean, Montgomery Bus Boycott is proof of that. The way we've resisted here in Minnesota is proof of that. Um, and it makes me wonder if it doesn't matter if it's the state or the federal government or another group in your community. If it is injustice and your neighbor is being treated in an unjust way, um, then standing up and being present and speaking truth and resisting is just what we're called to do. So I don't know that it matters if it's the state or the federal. Yeah, there's implications of, the federal government not giving Minnesota money for whatever, but I think resistance feels the same when you're resisting, and if you're doing it from that place of loving neighbor, I think that resistance feels the same whether it's the state or the federal government or your, another group in your community.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm thinking in the long run. Of course, Laurie, resistance is resistance. But in Montgomery, the long run was played in the courts by a decision that then changed the whole environment, and brought justice in the community after the year and so forth of the boycott. I wonder if now it is more political than judicial, uh, and how in the long run we will need to be working in changing the political landscape, rather than waiting for a decision by the Supreme Court,
Oh, yeah.
as the Supreme Court has been kind of ambivalent in terms of defending the rights of the people. And what kind of political thinking should we be designing and building for the sake of our communities?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this is playing out in courts too. There's all sorts of lawsuits. Um, Minneapolis just sued the federal government for the evidence of why they murdered Renee Good and Alex Preddy,
Mhm.
because there's been no evidence of what they say. So, there's all the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, I think, probably doesn't sleep. I think he just is constantly having to file lawsuits. I do think we have to think about, what it means to be a democracy and what it means to have a president. And does that president look like a king? Does that president have authority to do whatever and ever and no accountability? I mean, I think that's what we have to think about and for all of our elected officials. So yeah, I think there's a real reckoning happening, or should anyway. Jack?
Yeah, if I could tag on to that, that's beautiful, Laurie. I would say we also have to think about what it means to be Christian as Christian people. What does that mean? What is our Christology saying? Who is Jesus for us? And why does he matter for us? What is our compelling reason for being Christian? And talk about those, mine out some truths that can be accomplished for our lives. So if it turns out that love, really is powerful, and grace is true, what does grace call us, command us, compel us to do in a moment where there's structural and systemic injustice and violence? And what do we do? How do we govern ourselves as Christ Church?
Definitely. Yes. Our spirituality, our Christian values definitely has something to say in this present tense. Sean McLaughlin.
Yes.
Oh,
I'm sorry. And the Black church, the historic Black church, understood that God was a God of freedom and liberation. The historic Black church was America's original and most authentic freedom institution that shaped leaders and changed systems for generations. That's what was propelling the movement there in Montgomery. And that movement, although in smaller numbers now, is still around and still directing leaders and building leaders and changing systems across the country, and working in partnership with others, of other Christians, people of the faith, but still moving along the dial from injustice to justice in Christ's name.
Sure, definitely. Sean McLaughlin, two questions. On the one hand, he's saying on the one hand, we have to tend to our part of the front in our sector, deal with the struggle at hand. On the other, this is a flooding the zone and other issues are being hidden as they distract us. For example, the Epstein files. And as a former U.S. MC infantryman and seminarian, I am deeply concerned about NBA DOC response to the Iran war. I was fortunate to not serve in combat, but some of my fellow activists have significant TBI even though they survived the IEDs. We are tired from 20 years of forever wars. Of course, we are advocates for peace, and we need to continue advocating for ending all wars and for people can opt for diplomacy and dialogue and affirming the other and affirming our neighbors. Thank you, Sean. Monica Hunter is saying, can you speak to keeping and spreading joy, peace, love, and encouraging rest as resistance? Of course, I think that we are called to do that. Any final comment, my dear brother and sister, as we are almost wrapping up this webinar? What can be an advice for anybody who wants to be involved in justice in times like this? What would be one advice that you can share with our audience?
Just one?
I don't think we I don't think we
I was
have
like,
too
oh
much
wow,
time
what?
for for more than one or two maybe.
I think I've got
It's
one.
not me. It's a matter of we're running out of time.
It's to, I would say, to build the relationships and to do something. I mean, we have said here that even just getting out of bed in the morning is doing something. For those days when you're tired and exhausted because you did something the day before. So build the relationships and do something.
Yes.
Amen.
With Christ's love, of course.
Yes. I would complement that by saying, pray, study, act. Pray, study, act.
Amen. And with that spiritual advice coming from our hearts, our minds, our will to affirm justice, specifically the ones that suffer the most. In that particular spirit, I am very thankful for our speakers, Pastors Laurie and Jack. Thank you so much. I think we are blessed by your work and honored by your presence here today. So in the chat box, you will find links to their websites and to contact information so you can visit and learn more about their ministries and creating justice in their local communities. We encourage you to take whatever actions you can in supporting the causes of justice and equity for all. Another way you can be involved and stay informed of our work is to sign up for our newsletter at nbacares.org/newsletter. There are a few check boxes you can mark to let us know you're interested in NBA program topics. Finally, we ask you for your support. Your generous gifts help NBA continue its work of creating communities of compassion and care and supporting the work of justice and equity. We are ever grateful for these blessings, and you can donate online at nbacares.org/donate. So, as for my friends Laurie and Jack, is there any event you want to advertise shortly as we are wrapping up this webinar? You already announced this event on Saturday, the No Kings, there in Minneapolis, right?
Yes, well, it's
Yes.
across the
It's
country, actually,
across
it's
the
across the
country.
world.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you are a disciple of Christ, I encourage you to get out there with your chalice. Let people know that the church does stand for justice. And I believe there's gatherings on Palm Sunday also across the country. So this is the time to stand up as church for sure.
Really. I will be marching here in Puerto Rico, and we also will be marching against a project that is threatening our environment in the western part of the island. It's called Proyecto Esencia. So we will be marching here against kings and also the ones that threaten our environment. Jack, any announcement?
I would say, as you go to the No Kings rally, if you can, take somebody younger with you.
Ah, good.
That's an excellent idea. Yes. Bring your neighbors, invite them,
Yeah.
speak and put your voice into action. So thank you again very much. And remember, in our last slide of this night, the arc of the
Mhm.
moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Quote from Martin Luther King, and behind him you can see all of the people from Montgomery enjoying the good news of the decision by the court, so they could then end the boycott victorious. I hope we would have the same victory in Minneapolis as well
Amen.
as in the rest of the country. Blessings to
Amen.
you all. We hope to see you again for our next events. Thank you. May God bless you. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank
Blessings
you.
to
God
you
help,
all.
please.
Good night.
Good night.